Today's hearing deals with AIG, and I, in particular, want to emphasize the importance of looking both backwards and forwards. As we look back at what happened with AIG, the context should be clear. And as I've said, I know there are people in the society with whom I disagree scientifically who believe in a theory that says the world was created some 4,000 plus years ago. That's not an issue today, but I do think it's important to remember that the world was not created on January 20th, 2009, and there is an historical context. And the historical context goes back at least as far as the Bear Stearns issue. And I think we need to set the stage. Bear Stearns was failing, and the Secretary of the Treasury and the Chairman of the Federal Reserve last year, Mr. Paulson and Mr. Bernanke, together worked out an arrangement so that the creditors of Bear Stearns, not Bear Stearns shareholders, but that the creditors of Bear Stearns were compensated, for fear that a failure to compensate them would have severe negative consequences in the economy. Then Lehman Brothers found itself in the same situation, and when efforts to find another private party to step in failed, the Bush administration made the decision at the time, I think in part in the context of criticism that had come from the intervention with Bear Stearns creditors, to allow it to fail. So that Lehman Brothers failed, and none of the creditors of Lehman Brothers were aided. I recently was visited by two members of the House, our colleague Ms. Spear and our colleague Ms. Eshu, because the county they represent, California, lost a lot of money when Lehman Brothers went under. And we have others. We have many, many municipalities that are suffering from that. But the decision was made to not intervene in Lehman Brothers, and I think it was fueled in part by the view that there had been too much intervention in Bear Stearns. And people said, let's have free enterprise. Let's let it work. Free enterprise means the right to fail with no safety net. So Lehman Brothers was allowed to fail with no safety net. A consensus formed, I believe, fairly soon after that, that allowing Lehman Brothers totally to fail had severe negative economic consequences. And that's the context which needs to be remembered when we think about what was done by the Federal Reserve with the support of the Treasury in 2008 with regard to AIG. My own view is that the negative example of Lehman Brothers, and that included a number of political criticisms, as well as a view that it had a severe economic negative effect, was, I believe, behind the decision to intervene for AIG. I will remind people the decision to intervene on behalf of AIG was a decision the Federal Reserve took under its statutory authority. Unlike the subsequent vote in the House to create the Troubled Asset Relief Program, there was no congressional involvement, except, you might say, with congressional involvement when we sit in a room and are told something and we say, wow, that was the congressional involvement with regard to that. We did raise some questions, but we were being informed. I cite that because the going forward part, and people will talk about the bonuses, but the going forward part is this. I believe we have two very important negative examples before us of how not to proceed. One was the Lehman Brothers example where they were allowed totally to fail and there was no help to any of the creditors. The other was the AIG example where there was help for all of the creditors. Neither one is what we should be doing going forward. The problem is, and I would contrast what we saw with Lehman and with AIG with what we saw with Wachovia, IndyMac, WAMU, Countrywide. Banks also failed in 2008, and that was not a happy occasion in every case, although those of us who will mourn Countrywide are a very small number. But the fact is that we have in place mechanisms involving a very well-run FDIC with the cooperation of other financial regulators that contain the damage. So when these banks failed, it was neither a Lehman Brothers total negative on the economy or an AIG excessive intervention in the minds of some on behalf of creditors. Our job, and again, this was first raised by Secretary Paulson last year and Mr. Bernanke, and we are now at the point where we will be addressing that. We need to give somebody somewhere in the federal government the power to do when non-bank major financial institutions need to be put out of their misery. We need to give somebody the authority to do what the FDIC can do with banks. It's called resolving authority, but it is giving somebody, and it is, as people should understand, a form of the bankruptcy power given under the Constitution. It allows us to avoid the choice of all or nothing. Nothing in the case of Lehman Brothers, all in the case of AIG, equally unacceptable alternatives, and our job is to work together to try and find some other way.